I stared at the handwritten note slid under my office door. I recognized my mother's looping cursive immediately. It was the exact same handwriting she used 10 years ago to write me out of the family. The heavy cardstock sat perfectly centered on my floor. It practically radiated the same cold, demanding energy she always brought into any room. I didn't pick it up right away. I just looked at it. For a decade, I had been dead to them. Just an embarrassment they whispered about at their country club dinners. But now, my company just went public. And suddenly, my mother bypassed security to leave this. To understand the sheer audacity of that note, you gotta understand the world I grew up in. My parents, Richard and Evelyn, were high-end commercial real estate developers. Their entire lives were built around status. Our home was a sprawling, sterile monument to their success. It was filled with white carpets and antique furniture no one was actually allowed to sit on. There was this suffocating pressure to conform. I was their only child, which basically meant I was their primary investment. From the time I could walk, my path was mapped out. Private schools, Ivy League, and eventually a corner office in their firm. I was supposed to be the polished heir to their pristine empire. But I never fit into their mold. I hated the superficiality of their world. I didn't care about country club politics or commercial real estate. While my mother was trying to teach me how to host a charity gala, I was volunteering at community gardens. I was getting my hands dirty and becoming completely obsessed with sustainability. When I was 22, I finally sat them down at our massive dining table and told them the truth. I wasn't going to law school. I was taking my grandmother's trust fund to start a composting facility. I'll never forget the silence that fell over that room. My father looked at me like I'd just confessed to a crime. My mother's face went completely rigid. She asked if it was a sick joke. My mother didn't even yell. She just looked at me with this profound, chilling disgust. She told me if I wanted to be a glorified garbage collector, I was on my own. No family name, no support, nothing. They gave me an ultimatum right there at the table. Drop the pipe dream or pack my bags. So I chose the garbage, and the next 10 years were the hardest of my life. Building a waste management company from the ground up isn't glamorous. It's grueling, exhausting, and honestly, pretty revolting work. For 3 years, I was up at 4 a.m. driving a rented truck, hauling bins of rotting food out of slippery restaurant alleys. I constantly smelled like methane and sour milk. My hands were permanently calloused. I poured every dollar I had and every tear I could shed into Verdant Cycle. There were months I didn't even know how I'd make payroll. Some nights I was just too tired to drive back to my tiny apartment. So I'd just sleep right there on the concrete floor of my office. And through all of it, my parents never called. Not on birthdays, not on holidays. When my grandmother passed away, I found out through a distant cousin. They intentionally left me off the obituary. They had truly erased me. But every time I wanted to quit, I remembered the disgust in my mother's eyes. I refused to let them be right about me. And slowly, the tide began to turn. Sustainability stopped being a fringe concept and became a corporate mandate. Major chains started signing exclusive contracts with us. We patented a new method for accelerating biogas capture. It completely revolutionized the industry. My little garbage company grew into a regional powerhouse, and then a national one. 10 years after I was banished from my family home, Verdant Cycle went public. The IPO exceeded all market expectations. I stood on the balcony of the stock exchange ringing the bell, knowing my net worth had just surpassed my parents' wildest dreams. The media dubbed me the Queen of Green. I was featured in magazines, interviewed on financial networks, celebrated as an innovator. And then, exactly 21 days later, my mother's handwriting appeared on my floor. I finally bent down and picked up the envelope. Inside was a heavy card with a brief, perfectly written message. It said they saw the news, they were proud, and they wanted to get lunch. Every survival instinct I had screamed at me to shred the note. I should have just called security and thrown it away. But human nature is a really complicated, messy thing. No matter how much success you achieve, part of you still wants your parents to love you. I wanted to hear them admit they were wrong. So, against my better judgment, I agreed to meet. When I walked into the restaurant, they were already seated at a corner booth. I braced myself for the people who'd kicked me out a decade ago. But when they stood up, I was genuinely shocked. They had aged so much. My father's hair was entirely white, and he looked thinner. His custom suit was hanging a little loosely on his frame. My mother's smile was flawless, but her eyes looked exhausted. They greeted me with this overwhelming, forced enthusiasm. They hugged me like I hadn't been dead to them for a decade. It felt completely surreal. Honestly, it felt entirely wrong. The lunch was an absolute masterclass in gaslighting. Over sparkling water and expensive salads, they completely rewrote history. My mother reached across the table and gently touched my hand. She actually looked me in the eye and said their harshness was intentional. She claimed they pushed me away because they knew I needed to be hungry to succeed. They didn't apologize for the pain. They took credit for my resilience. I sat there listening to this unbelievable story, feeling a cold knot in my stomach. I didn't blow up. I didn't scream. I just watched them. And as I watched, I started to notice the cracks. My father used to command every room with absolute arrogance. Now he was nervously tapping his silver fork against his plate. He was laughing too loudly. It wasn't the proud curiosity of a parent. It was the clinical probing of a creditor. My mother kept steering the conversation away from my personal life. Instead, she wanted to know about the mechanics of my IPO. She casually asked about my board of directors and my liquid assets. It wasn't the proud curiosity of a parent. It was the clinical probing of a creditor. She was sizing up my net worth right across the table. Before we parted ways, my father insisted I come to the family home for dinner. He said it would be a private evening to celebrate our reconciliation. I agreed, even though every instinct told me to run. As I walked out of the restaurant, something felt very wrong. The lingering scent of my mother's expensive perfume couldn't mask the truth. They reeked of absolute desperation. That night, I called a close friend of mine. He works as a forensic accountant. I've learned that sudden, unearned affection usually has a price tag attached to it. I gave him my parents' names and their primary holding companies. I asked him to do a quiet, deep dive into their public filings. I needed to know exactly what kind of financial shape they were in. While I waited for his report, the night of the dinner arrived. I drove up the familiar winding driveway to the massive estate. It was the house I grew up in, but it never felt like a home. Walking through those heavy double doors felt like stepping into a museum of my childhood trauma. Everything looked exactly the same. The pristine white carpets, the expensive art, and that suffocating silence. My parents greeted me with more of that forced warmth. They handed me a glass of vintage champagne. They were playing the roles of the perfect loving hosts. I stood there holding the champagne, trying to keep my composure. The whole room felt rigid and oppressive. It was meticulously curated to impress outsiders, just like it always had been. I walked further into the living room, and my eyes immediately went to the corner. There it was, my dad's prized possession. An antique 19th century mechanical grandfather clock. He used to brag that it was the literal heartbeat of our family legacy. We sat down on those pristine white sofas, making the most agonizingly hollow small talk you can imagine. Every smile was forced. Every word felt empty. And then the clock struck 8. But instead of that deep, echoing vibration I grew up with, it made this flat, tinny electronic sound. I just stared at it. I looked closely at the wood casing. It was a really good replica, but it was a fake. I slowly looked back at my parents. My dad was just staring, rigidly, down at his champagne flute. He looked pale, completely frozen, and he wouldn't even make eye contact with me. My mom was sitting next to him, aggressively adjusting a throw pillow. Her movements were so sharp and nervous. They knew I heard it. They knew that I knew. The realization hit me like a freight train. You don't quietly sell off the heartbeat of your family legacy unless you're drowning. This whole pristine house was just a facade. The rest of that dinner was just a blur of tension. The food literally tasted like ash. Every time they smiled at me, it felt like a threat. I kept my composure and played the grateful daughter, but my mind was racing. When I finally got out of there and made it to my car, my hands were shaking. Not because I was sad. It was this creeping, terrifying sense of betrayal. They didn't want me back. They just wanted my money. The next morning, my accountant friend finally called me back. His voice was incredibly grim. He told me I needed to sit down, and then he sent over a secure file sharing link. I opened the link on my monitor, and it was an absolute financial, non-graphic detail. Their entire real estate empire was a hollow shell. They were heavily leveraged, bleeding cash, and facing total ruin. Worse than the debt was the deception. They'd been shuffling money between shell companies to hide their insolvency. It was a house of cards, and they were facing multiple defaults within 30 days. They needed exactly $6 million to stop the bleeding. It was a staggering amount of money, but it was an amount I could now easily access. They knew exactly what my liquid net worth was after the IPO. I sat there feeling a profound, crushing emptiness. I wasn't a daughter coming home. I was a bailout package. 2 days later, my father called my assistant and formally requested a meeting. He didn't want to meet at a restaurant this time. He wanted to come to my territory. I told my assistant to clear my afternoon schedule. I made sure the boardroom was perfectly prepared. I wanted them to see exactly what the garbage business looked like. My office wasn't a dirty warehouse. It was a sleek, state-of-the-art facility overlooking the city. When my parents walked into my executive boardroom, I could see the thinly veiled shock in their eyes. It was built with sustainable materials and humming with the energy of a wildly successful enterprise. They were stepping into my world now. I sat at the head of the long glass table. I didn't offer them anything to drink. I didn't make small talk. I just waited. My father took a seat near me. He placed a thick, leather-bound folder on the table. It was designed to look like a premium investment opportunity. But I already knew it was just a desperate plea for cash. My mother sat next to him, her posture rigid. Her hands were folded perfectly in her lap. She tried to maintain that flawless high society facade, but you could smell the desperation.
My father cleared his throat.
He attempted to summon his old, commanding aura. He started by telling me how impressed he was with my operations. He used corporate buzzwords, trying to sound like a peer rather than a parent. And then he made the pivot. He slid the leather folder across the glass table toward me. He called it an exclusive, once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to buy into the family legacy. He gave me a warm, fatherly smile, his voice dripping with synthetic sincerity. He started throwing around all these corporate buzzwords, trying to sound like we were just two CEOs talking business. Then he slid this thick leather folder across the table. He called it an exclusive opportunity to buy into the family legacy. He wanted me to invest in the exact same development that was bankrupting them. And he just casually dropped that the buy-in was $6 million. He leaned back and gave me this warm, fatherly smile. His voice was just dripping with this fake sincerity. He actually said they wanted to bring me back into the fold. I didn't even touch the folder. I just rested my hands on the glass table, and I let the silence just hang there in the room. You could feel the panic starting to set in. I watched a bead of sweat form right at my dad's hairline. My mother's jaw was clenched so tight I thought it might snap. Finally, I broke the silence. I asked them about the grandfather clock in their living room. I told them I knew it was a fake, and I asked exactly when they sold the real one. My dad's fake smile vanished instantly. All the color just drained right out of his face. My mother actually flinched. They knew they were caught, so he started stammering, trying to play dumb. His voice got real small. He tried to tell me the clock was just out for repairs. I didn't even let him finish. I just told him to stop. Then I pulled out the dossier my accountant put together.
The one with all their real numbers.
I dropped my file right on top of their fancy leather folder. It hit the glass table with this heavy thud. And right then, the whole illusion just shattered. I looked him dead in the eye and laid it all out. I told him I knew about the defaults, the stalled development, and the commingled funds. I knew they were 30 days away from the bank taking everything. This wasn't an investment. It was a desperate plea for a bailout to save themselves from public humiliation. The reaction was instantaneous. The facade of the loving parents shattered completely. It revealed the ugly, desperate truth underneath. My father looked like he was going to be sick. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. It was my mother who reacted with anger. Her face twisted into a sneer I hadn't seen in 10 years. The mask of the proud mother dissolved instantly. She hissed at me, her voice shaking with rage. She called me a smug, ungrateful brat for disrespecting the life they had provided. I actually laughed, though there was absolutely no humor in it. I reminded her that they had forbidden me from using their name. They cut me out of family photos. They didn't even tell me when my grandmother died. I told them they didn't have a daughter anymore. They just had a creditor they couldn't afford. My father finally found his voice. But it wasn't commanding anymore. It was small, and he was begging. He leaned forward, whispering that if this got out, they'd be ruined. He said they'd be a laughingstock. He pleaded with me, saying $6 million was nothing to me now. He told me I couldn't let my own parents drown. I looked at the man who had once terrified me. He just looked pathetic. There was no legacy here, just pride built on lies and debt. I kept my voice completely steady. I told him that my garbage was real. My garbage creates energy and grows food. It's honest. Their world was just a shiny illusion, and it was finally collapsing. I stood up from the table. I picked up my dossier and left their leather folder exactly where it was. I looked down at them and made it clear. I wasn't giving them a dime. Not as an investment, not as a loan, and not as a gift. They made it clear 10 years ago that I was on my own. Now, they were on theirs. My mother stood up abruptly. Her face was red, and her hands were trembling. She resorted to the exact same fret she had used a decade ago. She told me they were done with me forever. She screamed that I would never be welcome in their home again. The threat didn't hurt or scare me this time. It just sounded completely absurd. I looked at her softly. I reminded her that their home belonged to the bank now. I told her I'd ask security to show them out. I turned and walked out of the boardroom. I didn't look back. As I walked down the hallway, my heart was pounding. But it wasn't panic. It was beating with a profound, overwhelming sense of liberation. The spell was finally broken. For 10 years, I carried the weight of their rejection. I let their disgust drive me, haunting my quietest moments. I spent a decade secretly wondering if I really was an embarrassment. But sitting in that boardroom, watching them beg, the spell finally broke. They weren't gods. They were just flawed, terrified people who cared more about looks than reality. 3 weeks later, the news broke. The defaults went public and the fraud investigations began. Their pristine, flawless image was dragged right through the mud. They lost everything. The sprawling estate and the fake grandfather clock were seized by creditors. They were forced into bankruptcy and moved to a small, rented condo. Their country club memberships were revoked. The high society friends they sacrificed my childhood for vanished overnight. Nobody wanted anything to do with the toxic scandal. I didn't celebrate their downfall. There was no joy in watching their empire crumble. But there was peace. Absolute, undeniable peace. Sometimes closure doesn't come with an apology. The people who broke you might never admit what they did. You can't heal by seeking validation from the ones who caused your wounds. I picked up the handwritten note my mother had left me. I stared at the elegant cursive that used to hold so much power over me. It was just ink on paper. I walked over to the shredder in the corner of my office. I fed the heavy cardstock right into the machine. I watched it destroy the last piece of their hold on me. I watched it turn into absolute garbage. And for me, that was exactly where the real growth began. It's kind of fitting, honestly. Her final words to me ended up just like the scraps I built my whole empire on. Ready to be broken down and turned into something that actually gives life. I don't dwell on the past anymore. The very next morning, I was right back out in the field. Standing in our newest facility, breathing in the smell of rich, dark earth. This right here, this is my real legacy. We just launched this massive initiative with urban farms all over the city. Walking through those community gardens, seeing people harvest real, healthy food, it just reminds me why I started this whole journey in the first place. I look at this soil, and it's just teeming with potential. My parents looked at my work and saw nothing but filth. But seeing the life springing up from this dirt, I know I made the right call. I realized leadership isn't about ruling through fear or demanding perfection. Sitting in the boardroom with my team, the energy is just electric. We aren't hiding debts or faking it. We're building something real, together. I look at the brilliant people who helped me build this company. They're my chosen family now. We weathered the storms and the grueling hours, and we came out stronger. There's no fake legacy here, just genuine progress. The media can call me the Queen of Green all they want, but I know the truth. I'm just a woman who refused to let a toxic obsession with status dictate her life. I took the garbage they threw at me and turned it into fuel. Watching the sun set over the city, it's hard not to feel connected to it all. Somewhere out there, our trucks are starting their evening routes, continuing that endless, beautiful cycle of renewal. The city is breathing, and we're helping it thrive. I sit down at my desk and open a fresh, blank notebook. No demands, no ultimatums. Just blank pages waiting for new ideas and new ways to heal the planet. Finally, the past is finally composted into the foundation of my future. My name is Elena, and I'm the CEO of Verdant Cycle. I didn't inherit an empire. I built one from the ground up, out of the things other people threw away. And looking ahead, I know the best is yet to come.